SIA is not a meaningful metric to understand the threat of terrorism along the border or anywhere else. Although terrorists who cross the U.S.-Mexico border have never murdered or injured anyone in a terrorist attack on U.S. soil, there is, of course, a chance that a foreign-born terrorist could cross the U.S.-Mexico border and commit an attack at some point in the future. It's got to be above zero. The way to reduce that threat is to vastly expand legal immigration, to diminish the numbers of illegal immigrants down to very low levels. Such a liberalization and deregulation of immigration would allow Border Patrol agents to focus their efforts more fully on deterring security threats instead of trying to centrally plan international labor markets. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Finally, we'll hear from Chief Rodney Scott. Chief Scott.
Chairman, ranking members, members of the subcommittee, good morning. I would like to share with you 3 critical facts that I learned while serving as a Border Patrol agent. The most critical fact is that border security is national security. It's not a political talking point, it's a fact. Over my career, I was honored to participate in the transition from an uncontrolled, chaotic southwest border to a border that was arguably more secure than ever. Unfortunately, I also witnessed the rapid and systematic destruction of decades of improving border security in just the first few weeks of the Biden administration. To be blunt, the systematic destruction of border security and the predictable consequences scare the hell out of me, and they should scare you too. As a young frontline agent, I routinely observed smugglers coordinate distractions to get illegal aliens past Border Patrol. A common distraction was as simple as a couple of very fast teenage males making a highly visible illegal entry, and as agents shifted to chase that bait, the real group of illegal aliens would rush across the border through the gap that was created. This same tactic was used by drug smugglers. Agents would respond to a group of illegal aliens or a vehicle illegally entering, and as soon as they responded, a more significant load of narcotics would come through just out of their reach. Mexican drug cartels over my career have increasingly asserted control over all crossings between the ports of entry. Their sophisticated tactics and techniques continually improve, but the basic concept remains the same. Create a distraction too good for agents to ignore and then exploit the gap that's created. Any alien with something to hide will routinely pay to evade law enforcement, to be in that second wave. That's the second critical fact, that the most serious threats to America are more commonly in that second wave. People don't understand that U.S. law enforcement records checks search U.S. databases. Crimes committed by a foreign national outside the U.S. rarely appear in these databases. That's the third critical fact, that records checks are just a tool to support a meaningful interview. Earlier this week, America paused to remember 9/11 terrorist attacks. 9/11 had a profound impact on my understanding of border security. In the years following, I was honored to represent Customs and Border Protection on several interagency teams, and we were tasked with improving America's anti-terrorism capabilities. Like now, we knew that terrorist organizations were going to increasingly seek to use operatives that were unknown. We could not rely solely on records checks. CBP improved situational awareness through intelligence and expanded capabilities of officers and agents so that they could solicit information and determine intent through effective interviews. Additionally, Border Patrol improved surveillance and doubled down on deterring illegal immigration. And it was working. Fewer illegal entries and an expanding smart wall system bought agents more time. With more time to invest in interviews, the benefits cascaded quickly. The agents were able to identify imposters, fraudulent families, gang members, various criminals, and even potential terrorist ties that records checks had not revealed. In contrast, every single border security and immigration action that the Biden administration has taken has resulted in an increase in illegal immigration, overwhelming CBP capabilities, and surrendering control of our southwest border to the cartels. Every illegal alien released into the United States is free advertisement for the cartel and ensures an endless wave of customers to overwhelm agents. Of great concern is the increasing number of Border Patrol encounters with illegal aliens on the national watch list. From 2017 to 2020, Border Patrol encountered 14 illegal aliens on that watch list. But from 2021 through 2023, that number jumped to 263, with 149 of these being in just this year alone. This is a serious national security threat, but it only represents the known. What threats were in the 1.7 million known gotaways? What about the unknown gotaways? Compounding this threat, overwhelmed officers and agents no longer have time to conduct meaningful interviews. Border Patrol is overwhelmed with illegal aliens from several countries that are known to be affiliated with terrorism, but those agents cannot get timely language translation support to conduct the most basic processing, let alone a meaningful interview. This continues even after the discovery of the ISIS-associated smuggler that helped Uzbekistanis enter the U.S. illegally. The release of those Uzbekistanis demonstrates the vulnerability of overly relying on data systems for our national security. The key to effective law enforcement and border security will always be face-to-face interviews. The ongoing massive illegal immigration is a threat to our national security. And didn't we all promise after the 9/11 to never forget? Look forward to your questions.
I want to thank you and all the witnesses for their testimony. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and we'll begin with Mr. Biggs.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see that we're having this hearing. So this notion that being concerned about terrorists entering through the southwest border, which is absolutely open, is that somehow is fiction or speculation, is probably one of the most asinine pieces of testimony I have heard in Congress. It's astounding. I find myself saying, have you even ever been to the border? Have you seen what's going on at the border? Do you know what's going on at the border? I go down often, real often, and I look at data constantly. And the biggest piece of data that you have ignored is the 1.7 million known gotaways. Those are known gotaways. The unknown gotaways probably match it 1-for-1 minimum. Have you ever stood in a group of individuals, as I have, and you say, where are you from? Russia. Oh, really? And there's 40 of you. You're all about 25 years old. And then we bring a translator in. All of a sudden, they don't speak Russian. They say they're from Georgia. Bring a different translator in. They say, oh, well, yeah, we really are Russian. The number of people coming across that we can't even vet through the process when we encounter them, or through CBP-1, where we're sending them to the ports of entry. I find it astounding that anybody would. This is the problem. This is the problem. We've got people just say they're the ones that are engaged in fiction and speculation. Actually, it's not fiction and speculation. It's a great big dream, and it's a hope and a wish, because it's going to be people like you who get to say, yeah, we were wrong, when a terrorist does engage in activity in the homeland. I'm astounded, flabbergasted by that testimony. And I've heard a lot of weird testimony in here since I've been here. Chief Scott, tell us a little bit about this notion. So we're also told that if somebody's on the terrorist watch list, it's no big deal, right? It's really no big deal because they haven't committed an act of terrorism. Why do we have a terrorism watch list, and why is that important and relevant?
It's important and relevant because our intelligence agencies, law enforcement, are always looking to put Border Patrol, to put law enforcement in general in a better position to keep America safe. So any kind of derogatory information, links to terrorism, and obviously there's other agencies that could testify to this more, are looked at, and people that meet certain criteria, there's reasonable suspicion to believe that they're tied to these threats to America, are put on that list. But by the way, that's only, again, the knowns.
Right, so we get to this point. Are there nations in the world that we have no information whatsoever about? We can't get any background on these people, even if we do encounter them and actually have a chance, which we don't really have very often, to interview them?
That would be the vast majority of the globe.
Yeah.
We have very little information. We act on what we have, but when you think about the total population of the world, we have very, very minuscule data on anyone.
How about with Mauritania? Do we have?
Sorry?
How about with the country of Mauritania?
No.
Yeah, see, the reason I say that is because we're now starting to see groups of Mauritanians come in through Arizona. I got a call from a CBP agent last week. I said, what's going on? He said, a group of 250 Mauritanians. I said, well, how are we doing there? Do we have any way to vet them? No way to vet them. Mr. Binsman, you get down to the border often, I know that. Tell us about the Darien Gap. Is any vetting going on there before they move on from the Darien Gap up through the Northern Triangle states on up to the U.S.?
In the Darien Gap right now, there must be, 50,000 pouring through. Michael Yan, some other reporters are there right now sending us video. It's unbelievable what's happening, the numbers coming through. In normal times, when it's 10,000 or less, American and Panamanian officials have a biometric program where they try to, fingerprint and photograph, and take some, collection on almost everybody that crosses through there. Impossible to do that right now, impossible. The numbers are just flabbergasting, huge. We can't collect the bit.
So as we go here, and I close here, Cato's position is for an open border, supports an open border. This is what an open border looks like. Yield back.
Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said earlier, I and everyone on this panel want to keep Americans safe from real security threats, and that's why I'm disappointed that we didn't wait just the 2 weeks that we know we have so that we can get an actual classified briefing from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Having a hearing where the Republican majority tries to scare the public and demonize immigrants is not how we're going to make America safer. It's only going to serve to further divide us and prevent us from working together to find common sense bipartisan solutions that improve our national security. One way to do that is to expand legal pathways for people who come to the United States lawfully. Unfortunately, the Trump administration decimated our refugee and legal immigration systems, increasing migration from all over the world to the southern border. The Biden administration has worked hard to rebuild the refugee program and has tried to expand legal pathways using parole, but only Congress can provide permanent solutions. So, Mr. Narasta, let me turn to you. Congress has not expanded the number of legal immigrants that we accept in over 30 years. You mentioned in your testimony that the expansion of legal pathways would help improve our national security. Can you describe how that is so?
Yes, expanding legal pathways will vastly improve security. Being able to vet immigrants before they arrive would absolutely increase domestic security and further discourage terrorists or other bad actors from even trying to come to the United States in the first place. Many people who come here unlawfully today would love to come through a legal system where they can work lawfully. By expanding legal opportunities, it will drive the vast majority of them into the legal system, and then that will allow Border Patrol and these other agencies to focus on the small number who remain.
And you mentioned in your written statement some examples of how the Biden administration has used parole to expand lawful pathways. Can you discuss some of those examples here in more detail and how they actually contributed to decreased numbers at the southern border?
Yes, we know for a fact that expanding legal immigration works because of recent experiences with parole. Specifically, parole allows Americans to sponsor, at least in these cases, to sponsor foreigners from specific countries to come to the U.S. to work and live for a period of time. There's the Uniting for Ukraine example, which was implemented in May of 2022. It reduced the total number of Ukrainians showing up at the U.S.-Mexico border by 99.9% from April 2022 to July of 2023. And then there are similar parole programs that the administration put into effect for people fleeing Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti that also reduced illegal entries. So for example, Venezuelan illegal entries fell 66% from September of 2022, the month before the program was put into effect, to July of 2023. And then from December of 2022 through July of 2023, illegal entries from Haiti fell 77%, 98% from Cuba, and 99% from Nicaragua. Parole is a great short-term stopgap measure. It has proven, I think, empirically, once and for all, that increasing legal pathways reduces illegal immigration, increases border security. Immigration liberalization, though, is the only sustainable long-term fix to border chaos.
Thank you. One of the other places that the president can act unilaterally is by increasing the number of refugees that the administration accepts. And I'm happy to see that the Biden administration is on pace to welcome the highest number of refugees since 2016. Very briefly, because I have one other question for you that I want to get to, what are some additional ways that the Biden administration can expand and grow the refugee program?
Yeah, so the Welcome Corps is a great opportunity for Americans to sponsor folks, modeled on the Canadian system, rewritten on that at Cato. But I think the easiest, number one way to do it is for him to expand parole to other countries. For Guatemalans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, Colombians, and others fleeing dangerous, despotic, socialist, poor, cruel regimes, and to allow Americans to sponsor folks and to increase the cap for the CHNV countries. I think they should be numerically uncapped. They should only be capped by the generosity and willingness of Americans to sponsor people.
Thank you. And lastly, I know you've studied the nexus of terrorism and immigration quite extensively, and your testimony is very different from some of the people that are sitting right next to you. Why do you have such different perspectives?
I think it comes from our different approaches to studying topics in general. I like to look at the data. I like to zoom out to take a look at the big picture, to take a look at the actual risk, to use normal analysis, risk analysis used by the government in other areas, by insurance companies, by others, to look at that, to read through some of this other research out there. A lot of it is anecdote-driven. We need to be data-driven. Terrorism is too important to ignore the data.
Data-driven. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Tiffany for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. N., if I may address you that way, do you believe in the rule of law?
Yes.
Okay. So parole is a very specific concept in the law here in the United States of America that is supposed to be done on a case-by-case basis. That has been wiped out by fiat without passing a law to change the law that enabled parole back in 1954. They have been breaking the law. 80,000 Afghans came in, all waived in via, virtually all waived in via parole. So in other words, the reason illegal entries, as you've been saying, have been going down is because they've ignored the law. So you want us to be a lawless country, is what we're hearing from you. By the way, from the other side, that fear-mongering conservative who has been talking about this regularly is Mayor Adams from New York City, that his city is being destroyed. His quote, not mine. The ranking member talks about no government witness that we've heard from. Oh, yes, we have. We heard from Mayorkas back in July. We heard from the FBI 2 weeks prior to that from Mr. Ray. We heard from Sheriff Mark Daniels from Arizona. Let's share a couple quotes. FBI Director Ray, we are seeing all sorts of very serious threats that come from across the border. He closed by saying, it is becoming more and more of a priority for us. Sheriff Mark Daniels, in regards to fentanyl, the border is not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels, they are the winner of this. I asked Secretary Mayorkas about that. Who's telling the truth? FBI Director Ray or you? He wouldn't answer the question. I asked him, who's telling the truth? Sheriff Mark Daniels, who is seeing the fentanyl flowing in since January 20th of 2021 in numbers that have skyrocketed, and Secretary Mayorkas says, no, there's not a problem here. Who's telling the truth? He wouldn't answer the question. It's this whole approach that we're hearing, there's nothing to see. For those of you a certain age like me, you'll recognize it as the Sergeant Schultz approach. I see nothing. For those of you that are a little bit younger than I, you'll recognize it as the Harry Potter story with the Ministry of Magic. Mr. Marino, it is said that we have done nothing here. The House of Representatives passed H.R. 2. We have not proposed solutions. Is H.R. 2 a solution to the border crisis that we have?
Yes, it is. It restores a layered approach overall to border security and immigration enforcement. It restores law and order As I previously said, the major causation of this crisis has been the Biden administration's abandonment of law and order. And we are seeing this perfect storm of poor policies at the federal level to the local level. Poor policies, abandoning law and order at the federal level, and then it's exploiting the poor policies of abandoning law and order in sanctuary cities, and it's leading to chaos. The one thing that this Biden administration has proven to us is that when you remove all structure through law and order, it results in chaos.
Mr. Chairman, I want to highlight here for the American public that may be watching at this point, this body has passed legislation to secure the border, to bring a solution forward. Mr. Bensman, I really appreciate that Representative Biggs brought up the Darien Gap. I was there a little over 2 years ago. There were lots of people coming through there at that point. The people in Bajo Chiquito, a little Indian village right on the edge of the Darien Gap, were talking about being destabilized. I have a text from the last couple days from someone who is down there. The scene is truly apocalyptic. Bajo Chiquito is completely overrun. Thousands. They had about 500 when I was there that had rolled through that day, and they viewed it as destabilizing. Thousands now, possibly more arriving every second. Is this destabilizing the country of Panama?
Actually, Panama has a policy in place called controlled flow. So they are moving all of those migrants through into Costa Rica as fast as possible by bus so that they do not destabilize the country. They've always done that. Costa Rica does the same thing. They essentially, the governments are the smugglers in that case. They are moving them through rather quickly. However, the numbers that are passing through right now, I don't know. I don't think we've seen anything like this particular number right now that's happening, that's going through. It will certainly overwhelm the Panamanian and Costa Rican capacity to move them through like normal.
So they send them here.
They're all coming here.
I yield.
Everyone's coming here.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, since the mayor of my city was invoked, let me say that he is incorrect in saying that this is destroying the city. He is trying to get federal aid because it's properly a federal, not a city expense. But the fact is the $12 billion figure he mentions is over 4 years, $3 billion annual expense, which is 3% of the city's budget, which we can absorb with difficulty, although it's properly a federal responsibility, which the mayor is pointing out. Mr. Narasta, I want to discuss some of the terms that are being thrown around by the witnesses and my colleagues. We have heard a lot about migrants who are encountered who are on the terrorist screening data set or the TSDS. Can you discuss this data set in more detail? Who's on this list? Does it only include known or suspected terrorists?
It does not only include known and suspected terrorists. There is a reasonable suspicion standard for being included in these, but there is an exception to this based on a rational inference, which, as far as we can tell, is just when somebody says they should be on there and they put them on there. You know this is true because 99% of people nominated to be on this list by other agencies, by other people in the government, are included on there. There is no rigorous test or screening to put people on this list.
In your testimony, you mentioned that the TSDS includes many false positives. Can you explain what a false positive is and why they appear in the TSDS database?
So it's basically an erroneous match, mistaken identity. To be in this list, you have to have one biographical piece of information, and that's it. So a lot of people get caught up in this list, false flagged. Because of that, we had a recent case of this with Ali Reza Hadari, an Iranian national arrested along the border. He was flagged as a watch list. There were a lot of scary news stories about this that came out very rapidly about this Iranian national who was on the terrorist watch list, and then whoops, it was the wrong guy.
Thank you. During the Biden administration, we've seen an increase in the number of people on the TSDS database who have been apprehended along the southwest border. While this is still less than 1% of all apprehensions, can you discuss some of the potential reasons for this increase over the last couple of years? For example, Do migration patterns in the hemisphere, including increased migration from Colombia, have something to do with this increase of migrants on the TSDS apprehended on the southwestern border?
Not only is it very small, it is minuscule, 0.0, hold on, let me count the zeros, 0.007% of people apprehended by Border Patrol in 2023 so far have been on this watch list. I think that you hit on it directly, sir. Colombians explain a lot of this. I ran a regression analysis this morning about the number of Colombians coming to the border, and it's the best predictor of the number of hits on this watch list. The CBP does not release the nationalities of people who are on the watch list who come up as hits, but a great Washington Examiner piece that was leaked had some leaked data that said that 25 out of 27 of those folks in the first half of 2022 were from Colombia. And as I said in my written remarks, there's never been a terrorist attack by a Colombian. They don't target the US, but there's also a wrinkle in this data, which is when you take a look at Border Patrol apprehensions that lead to these hits and those through customs, the number has actually gone down. Has gone down since 2019.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of questions which I'd like to answer quickly because we only have a minute. We've also recently heard the term special interest aliens. Can you describe what a special interest alien is?
Yeah, DHS defines it as a non-US person based on analysis of travel patterns, and well, it's a long definition. A lot of other things are put on this list. A lot of words in practice. An SIA is just somebody from a country that could have a lot of terrorists in it. It's not a meaningful metric.
Are special interest aliens terrorists? Are they even suspected of terrorism?
No, in fact, as DHS...
According to one source,
Yeah.
Border Patrol agents encountered 25,000 special interest aliens in fiscal year 2022. That's a lot of people. Has an SIA apprehended by the Border Patrol ever committed an attack on U.S. soil?
No, and DHS explicitly says being an SIA does not mean that you are a terrorist.
Thank you. My last question is it possible that the number of SIAs have increased in recent years because the decimation of our legal immigration and refugee systems have led people around the world to believe that the only way to immigrate to the United States is via the southwest border?
Not only is it possible, I think it is extremely likely and the best explanation for why there has been an increase in illegal immigration and border crossers from around the world and from Central and South America. The U.S. immigration system is extremely restrictive. It is very difficult to come here. The idea that we have an open border is ludicrous. It is totally contrary to all the facts and to what's happening. If we have an open border, why are people paying $5,000 to $20,000 to be smuggled here? Virginia and Maryland have an open border. I don't have to pay $20,000 to go from my home in Virginia to Maryland. Where is this open border that we keep hearing so much about?
Thank you very much. My time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Roy.
Mr. Narasta, prior to September 11th, 2001, how many individuals had flown airplanes into the World Trade Center and killed 3,000 people?
0.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, how many gotaways have there been?
1.7 million known. That means there's evidence, video, whatever, but I can't give you an estimate on how many we don't know in the hundreds of miles of border that are not being patrolled.
Mr. Narasta, where are those 1.6 million gotaways?
They are most likely at different places in the United States.
Who are they?
Working and living.
Who are they?
Well, there are probably people from different countries around the world, sir.
Probably. People from all around the world.
They are from different countries around the world, yes, sir.
Yeah. How many different countries?
Well, if the data that we have about those who are apprehended is any indication, a large number of countries, probably about
162 of them from all over the world?
Probably, yes, sir.
Right. You willing to bet your family's life, my family's life, on the safety of in our country, irrespective of who these individuals are when you don't even know who they are?
Yes, sir. The chance of dying from a foreign-born terrorist attack since 1975
I'm
is
sure
1 in
that's, I'm sure, Mr.
4.4 million
Narasta,
per
Mr.
year.
Narasta, I'm sure that is great comfort to the families of the people from 9/11. Because when you sit here and testify that 0 people have committed a terrorist attack from crossing our border, I'm sure that is comfort to the people who had terrorist attacks committed by people who came here and overstayed their visas.
It is
the fact
no
of the matter
comfort
is, the fact of
to
the
the
matter
victim.
is, when you talk about having an open border, and you minimize the open border by saying that people have to pay $5,000 to come here in that open border, you're ignoring the fact of what that does to human beings, when it is in fact so open that that's exactly what's happening. I'm sure that your position is great comfort to the man in Baltimore who was being held up for ransom for $23,000 so that his little girl wouldn't get raped in a stash house in Fort Worth. Have you talked to that little girl or to that father?
Was he a terrorism suspect?
Have you talked to that father, Mr. Narasta?
No, I'm not aware of that terrorism case. What was his name?
Have you talked to that father whose little girl was being raped in a stash house?
No, I haven't. Is this
Right.
a terrorism-related issue?
I'm answering the questions, and this is the subject matter I want to talk about in this hearing, Mr. Narasta, because you're the one sitting here trying to tell the American people that our border is perfectly fine, that it is perfectly okay, that it is, not open because people are paying $5,000 or $10,000 to get here. So it is very much relevant that a little girl's getting raped in a stash house because of the policies of you and radical leftists who don't give a damn about it, because it is more politically expedient for you to saddle up to the Libertarian Cato Institute or a bunch of radical leftists and talk about, how important it is for people to free flow across borders.
I have talked about the chaos
That's the truth.
repeatedly, sir. The way to reduce the chaos is through legalization and liberalization,
Right.
not cracking down
Which
more.
will-
If you cared about
which
the
will
border chaos,
perpetuate-
that is the
which
way to
will
do it.
perpetuate the lawlessness, and you know it. Mr. Bentzman.
Exact
Can you
opposite.
Please, Mr. Bentzman, can you please expand on your testimony about dozens of terror watch list foreign nationals apprehended at the southern border being members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, and how dangerous that is to this country?
Right. One of the most disturbing aspects of the border crisis has been the recent development of FARC-related terror watch-listed suspects crossing that border. Those are people who have spent years and years involved in murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking, extortion, bombings. They are experts in weaponry. These are people who the United States absolutely would never countenance coming across the border and never provide a visa for, certainly. The fact that FARC members, former of the delisted faction, but also there are 2 FARC factions that are still listed, that those people would cross our border and come into this United States is anathema to all of our Homeland Security values, a terrible development that we should pay a lot of attention to, because a lot of Colombians are coming across. It is true that so far we haven't seen an attack. This is a relatively new thing for FARC, but one thing that we have to worry about is that when FARC members cross into the United States successfully, they will embed themselves in Colombian immigrant communities and very probably begin intimidation tactics, vigilante justice. This is a terrible thing for Colombian communities inside the United States in general. Plus, these people are professional drug traffickers their whole lives. So we're going to be hearing a lot about FARC people over the next decade. This is not.
Yield back. Thank
This
you,
is
Mr.
not a reason.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Bentzman.
Next is Ms. Escobar.
I'd like to thank Mr. Correa for yielding to me, switching with me. I want to thank our witnesses, and this is actually an important opportunity for us as Congress members to look at facts versus fiction in order for us to truly solve the issue at hand. I am the only member of this subcommittee and the larger committee on judiciary who was born, raised, lives on the border, raised my 2 children on the border, and I'm a very proud border resident. There is nobody in the country who wants a safe, secure border more than those of us who've invested our lives living there, creating community there, and wanting to make sure our kids can come back to living there. But it is so important for us to realize and acknowledge this is not an issue related to President Biden. Honestly, every time I hear that, it undermines the credibility of the person telling me, because I live on the border and I know for a fact, because I went to facilities during President Trump's administration that were overcrowded, and I saw the daily numbers at our shelters. The only time the numbers dropped were immediately after COVID, and only for a few months. They went right back up in May of 2020, long before the November 2020 election, long before President Biden was elected, even longer before he was sworn in. So we do ourselves and the issue an injustice by politicizing it and blaming the president. Frankly, if there's anyone to blame for the challenges at our border, it's the United States Congress. The United States Congress has failed to reform immigration law for 37 years. And I will tell you, it is absolutely ridiculous for either side to think that one day, if we just wait long enough, we will get everything we want. That's not gonna happen. And the only solution is bipartisan compromise. I want to inform my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and on my side of the aisle, we have a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform compromise right now. It's a bill that I worked on and filed with my colleague, Representative Maria Salazar, a Republican from Miami. It certainly is not a perfect bill. It is not everything I as a Democrat want. It's not everything Republicans want. But it's the first bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill that has been filed in the House of Representatives in a decade. Where I will agree with critics of the status quo, this is unsustainable. In fact, I get daily reports about how many people are in our shelters in El Paso, how many people have been apprehended. I am consistently speaking with migrants, with law enforcement, and with NGOs. Congress has to do something. I would invite everyone to begin focusing on what we should be doing within the realm of what's real and achievable in Congress in this political environment, so that we can create not just safety and security for all, but those key legal pathways that are critical not just to better managing a border, but critical to us as a country. What is so distressing about hearings like this is that immigrants are intended to be demonized. Immigrants make this country great. Immigrants have built this country. We need immigrants in order to ensure that we have a sustainable economy. We should be embracing immigrants and fixing broken systems in order to help achieve real solutions. Thank you, Mr. Correa, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Norester, do you believe we should have unlimited immigration to our country?
Unlimited? No.
So you believe that we need to limit number of immigrants?
Yes, I especially believe, security threats, people convicted or
So we should have some limit. Do you believe we should look at our immigration, how we can better serve our national interest?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And immigration to the U.S., legal immigration absolutely does that.
Okay, so we agree with you on some issues. Do you believe that our system is overwhelmed right now and it's extremely difficult to immigrate to this country legally?
It is extremely difficult and restrictive.
So we have
like
some
a
agreement.
Soviet-style system.
Well, it's good that we have some agreement. Do you believe that what's happening in the border and how overwhelmed the border, it poses national security risks?
There are absolutely risks that are posed by it. They are.
We have a problem over there. You believe the border need to be secured?
Yes, absolutely. And the way to do that is by expanding, I think, legal immigration.
Well, that is part of it because we need to have a better and look at that. But do we also need to make sure that we have proper border security, proper mechanism to deal with border security? Whichever tools, we can do that. Do you believe it needs to be secure border?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We do need a secure border. We should have a secure border. There are different perspectives of how to get there. In the same way that, Al Capone and a lot of organized crime was crushed by legalizing alcohol, I think that we can crush a lot of cartels and border crime and the chaos on the border, which is a travesty. The chaos is a travesty. Do that by increasing legal immigration to the United States to reduce the black market.
We have to look, it might have some effects, it depends how it is, but ultimately we are not right now created perverse incentive to human trafficking, drug trafficking, child labor, what's happening right now in places like Darien Gap. Is that correct? What we're doing is bad.
I would say that the immigration restrictions we have are an enormous subsidy to cartels and criminal organizations.
So we don't have disagreement on that. But let's talk a little bit about, I have an agreement, this problem being really punted for many years, and not just one president. But do you believe when president is not putting emphasis to help Border Patrol dealing with situation and not dealing right now where we have to overwhelm Border Patrol right now, it's magnified opportunities for cartel to take advantage of situation?
I think it's a perfect storm of many events. You have a very low unemployment in the United States, attracting large numbers of people coming in. I think that you have a restrictive system that makes it difficult for lawful people to come in. And I think you have other security issues that has resulted in a lot of the overwhelming, a lot of this overwhelming of Border Patrol. There is a lot of chaos. Nobody disagrees about that.
But do you believe, when my Democrat colleagues talking about comprehensive reform, it has to have a really significant conversation also over border security and how we can improve border security and be more innovative and make sure that we mitigate some of the risk and support our Border Patrol. Does it need to be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to do that, the best way for Border Patrol and for the U.S. government to regulate the flow of people in the United States is to legalize it, because you can't regulate a black market.
But what I said, we can have a debate about legal immigration, but we also should have a debate how we can secure a border better, correct?
I agree, but I think they're linked. I don't think you can do one without the other.
They're linked, and we should link, but unfortunately, we kind of having this chicken and egg situation where one side says we need to, because it's not. It needs to be a comprehensive solution, because this is not a joke situation on that border. It is a national security issue. It is a national security issue not just for border state. It's for all of the states, whether it's New York or Indiana, and now we allow also, cartels in China to really become in very material drug trafficking and fentanyl and what's happening in the country. It is going to be a big problem. So I hope you encourage your colleagues to look at the situation too, and look how not just, because we never have that conversation. We do it in politicking. And we have a very dangerous situation on the border. We have to acknowledge it as a country. I came here as a legal immigrant. This is country created by immigrants, but we need to have an orderly process. We cannot have anarchy with the country of law. Otherwise, we will become like third world country with cartels running the country, and we cannot let it happen. So I hope you will help me to talk to your colleagues, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and Mr. Correa.
Thank you, sir, for holding this hearing today. I'm also a member of Homeland Security. I'm the ranking member of the Border Security Subcommittee. And in Homeland, we've probably had at least half a dozen hearings on this issue, Mr. Chairman, and I welcome one in the Immigration Subcommittee. This is an important issue. National security is important for America. Democrats, Republicans, for America. We should be talking immigration, but let's talk border security. I want to remind everybody that the most deadliest attack on American soil, 9/11, we just had a commemoration across the country to remember, was carried out by folks with visas. One came on a student visa and the rest came on tourist and business visas. I have visited the border numerous times, and I've talked to the men and women in uniform, and I've asked them, what is it that makes your job better? What can make you more successful? The answer is intel, working with good intelligence, working with allies across the globe, Brazil, Mexico, the Middle East. That's what's helped you identify terrorists. In fact, if folks are interested in working with us, Chairman Clay Higgins and I have a bill, H.R. 4575, that will enable us to work much closer with our allies across the globe to make sure we have better intel. But when you talk about undocumented terrorism, we're going to mix them up. Okay, let's talk about terrorism and undocumented. If I can have this poster behind me, this is an undocumented soldier, an undocumented Marine. Does he look like a terrorist? Mr. Bestman, does that look like a terrorist to you? Mr. Noseworth, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Scott, is that a terrorist behind us? He made the ultimate sacrifice right after 9/11. And there's a lot more dreamers in American uniform who will probably be undocumented after the Supreme Court rules on the status of dreamers in the United States. I just want to make sure people understand terrorism versus immigration versus undocumented workers. Now, gentlemen, if I can, I'm going to ask each and every one of you, do you favor deporting 10 million tax-paying undocumented workers from the U.S. right now? Mr. Scott, yes or no?
I believe in the rule of law, and if you broke the law, you should be held accountable.
Would you deport them right now? It's a yes or no.
Judge ordered they should be deported, I would deport them.
Mr. Moreno?
It's impossible to do.
Yes or no? Would you deport them right now?
Yes.
Mr. Runsworth?
No, and I would try to legalize.
Mr. Bestman?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Would you support an amendment to H.R. 2, the immigration reform bill just passed by the majority, that would essentially exempt farm workers from mandatory E-Verify? Would you support that amendment? Mr. Scott?
No, I believe E-Verify is a very
Mr. Moreno?
tool.
No.
Mr. Bestman?
E-Verify has to happen.
That was the chairman's amendment to H.R. 2. Let's come back to terrorism. Let's talk about Colombia. Okay, FARC was essentially decertified as a terrorist organization in 2020. Is that correct? 2021, is that correct, yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, so, but yet we continue to talk about members of FARC, a civil war that happened 20 years ago, as terrorists. Is this refugee movement something unique to the United States, or is this something that's worldwide? Mr. Scott, worldwide or U.S.?
I believe there are struggles.
Mr. Moreno, I got less than a minute, guys, come on.
I couldn't hear the question, sir.
Is the refugee movement something unique to the United States, or is this a worldwide phenomenon?
No, it's not unique.
It's worldwide.
Yes, sir.
Colombia right now is hosting 3 million Venezuelan refugees. And we just talked about Colombia as being a source of the problem. And in my 20 seconds left, and the trips I've taken to Latin America recently, I think we have to think about the border challenge on a worldwide scale, okay? We have a lot of allies south of the border that are hosting refugees, are working with us. And for us to sit here and talk about what's going on at that border, I think as policymakers is very wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield.
Gentleman yields back, and Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to deviate from what I was going to say. I almost don't know where to start, but other than to say, Mr. Nor'aster, I disagree and sometimes agree and partially agree with people. I disagree with you so totally. You're sitting in your safe office looking at facts that you believe are accurate, which they're not, and not talking to the people who live at the border, the people who work at the border, the people that are suffering, whether it's in Arizona, California, Texas, and now, of course, the entire United States of America. Let me say one thing. Anybody that believes this problem is only a problem for the southern border is wrong. This is a problem for the United States of America. You know, just to give you a little example, a little different route, didn't come over the border. Did you ever hear of a man by the name of Danilo Cavalcante? He's the escaped, I know, quite a sensational thing that went on. A German Shepherd got him, thank God. This is a man that murdered his friend in Brazil illegally because he's a murderer, got into Puerto Rico, and then from Puerto Rico got to Florida and then came up to Pennsylvania. Had an argument with his girlfriend. He stabbed her with a butter knife 38 times. 38 times. And, you know, nobody's demonizing immigration. We are, almost all of us, either sons and daughters or immigrants ourselves. Immigration is a good thing. Legal immigration. What happened to the idea of the rule of law? Frankly, Mr. Nor'oster, I don't care what you think sitting in your safe office, removed from everybody, playing with some numbers. Go and talk to people. People who have suffered. And you know who's suffering too? A lot of the illegal immigrants, because they're being used. They're being used by these individuals that we know are dispensing drugs, are hurting children, are involved with human trafficking, drug trafficking. We call them the drug cartel, now establishing business in the United States. So the answer is not to just go willy-nilly and radically increase the number of illegal immigrants. The answer is to have real borders. The answer is to have the rule of law. And once you establish that, then you look into what needs to be done in our immigration system. We need to support our individuals who are trying to protect us at the border. I feel so badly for them because they are so much held back from doing their job. You know, last week I learned of an administration proposal from the Biden administration, and, you know, by the way, because of the New York City problem, what did we expect? It's a sanctuary city. New Jersey, where I live, is a sanctuary state. You're saying to people, we're going to fund you, we're going to take care of you, we welcome you, we will give you legal defense. But we don't take care of our own people. Our veterans still don't get what they need. We have a mental health crisis in America. We have an educational crisis in America. But we don't have the money and time for that. But we have the money and time to take God knows who, some of them good people, but doing it the wrong way, some of them not. And you know, according to your figures, never has any one of them done anything bad. That's just not accurate. It's not. So consider the national security implications of what they want to do to my state. I live in southern New Jersey, Atlantic City Airport. We have the 177th Fighter Guard. You have the FAA Technical Center. Serious facilities that need to be protected. The 177th protects the Washington to New York corridor. They wanted up to 60,000 people they're talking about in a town of 50,000 people. That's going to really do well for the education system. But it's your idea. You want to open it up. So let's open it all up. Every country in the world, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, just let them open it up. We can't absorb that, and you're not going to answer yet. This is especially concerning given recent reports that we have that there are ISIS sympathizers smuggling Russian and Eastern Europeans across the border, and terrorists have been apprehended who are real terrorists at our port of entry. I don't know where you get your stats from, but we also get stats that are good. So the situation's out of control. Chief Scott, in your written testimony, you mentioned how the terrorist attacks of September 11th were perpetrated by individuals who entered the country through ports of entry. Is the United States at an elevated risk of any type of terrorist attack given the state of the southwest border? You're a chief. You have only want to say what's the truth. Tell us the truth.
I believe we are, and we forget that there would have been 20 attackers, but one was actually caught by a CBP officer that interviewed him. We're not doing those interviews at the southwest border. The cartel's picking and choosing who enters our country right now instead of us, and that is a significant threat to this country.
Mr. Nor'oster, so you think...
time has expired.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chairman. Man, I'm fired up. I'm sorry.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we've talked a lot, and I don't think any of us in here are against legal immigration, but immigration builds a nation, but an invasion destroys a nation. And what we have going on the southern border right now is an invasion. We basically replaced the population of my entire state with people we really don't know who they are. And, as Mr. Noresta, is that how you say your name?
Narasta.
Noresta, the Remain in Mexico policy that the Trumps had in place, wouldn't that help vet people before they came here? Because I understand that the minute we did away with the Remain in Mexico, people started pouring in here and then applying for asylum. And so we gave them a cell phone and sent them on their way in buses or whatever the case may be. But don't you think in some ways that would help us vet the people coming across the border?
I don't think it would do too much better than what's going on right now. I mean, the main problem is that you just have a large number of people who are coming up, asylum and non-asylum.
Let me ask you this then. Sheriff Daniels testified. He 4 decades on the U.S. southern border. He wasn't in an office. He's actually on the border. He said the best he'd ever seen the border was in 2018. He said the worst he's ever seen it's today. So you mentioned the $5,000 to $20,000. That seems to have kind of become the going price now. How do those people, Mr. Morano, how do they pay that money back? If you're wanting to come to the country and you're coming from Venezuela and it's $8,000, what do those people, how do they pay that money back to the cartel? Is it a cash up front deal, or do they make installment payments? Are they indentured servants, or are they just drug mules?
They work it off while in the United States, and it comes in all different forms in terms of how they pay that off. This is where we're extremely susceptible to terrorist organizations, because depending on who funds in advance the money to the migrants to make this journey, their families are going to be held to account back in the country of origin where they start, and the migrant, once they enter the United States, is basically at the beck and call. It's an extension.
So you were saying they're either bond servants or slaves? Is that what our government is doing?
That's exactly right. And this is more pervasive than most people think. This is a huge problem. Most of these migrants don't have a way to pay in advance these funds to be trafficked across the border. So the overwhelming majority are going to do the beck and call work of the cartels and whoever else the cartels are working with.
And so they have to make those payments, or else the cartel goes and finds a family, or something horrible happens.
It's a fact. I've studied this for decades and decades. This is a long-term payment plan. If they don't do what they're told, families die in the countries of origin and the person here.
And this has gotten dramatically worse since January of 2020.
Dramatically.
Mr. Scott, I heard that this is an option too, that if you didn't have the money, you could actually backpack heroin, cocaine, or fentanyl to pay your passage. So instead of installment payments, you could actually backpack drugs, become a mule, if you will, to the cartel, and that paid passage. Is that also a case? Have you heard that? I just happened to hear that when I was at the border.
Yeah, I agree with the prior witness, everything you said, and that is also another way that you can pay is by trafficking drugs or doing any service for the cartel.
Chief, you said that the CBP caught one of the 9/11, one of the 20, I guess. My understanding is the other 9/11 pilots or terrorists, whatever we want to call them today, they actually overstayed their visas.
I believe that is accurate. The one individual, and DHS didn't exist yet, so it was Legacy Customs, but was doing a good interview and believed that something wasn't right with that individual and denied him entry. It's believed that would have been the 20th.
The others, Mr. Bensman, any of you guys want to answer this, had we actually enforced the laws on the books, and when the visa has expired, the visa expired, it was sent them back, this could have been averted, could it have not? And it doesn't matter. Yeah,
I believe it could be. I really want to highlight too, though, we identified that threat. We worked on that threat for years within CBP and DHS, but we never ignored, no matter what you do to criminals and terrorists, they're going to try to do something else. We knew they would go to the southwest border. That was part of the planning. That was the second phase. We're seeing it now. The threat is real.
So, Chief, you are warning us now that there is a problem.
Yes, definitely.
Go ahead, Mr. Morano.
Yes, and we are certainly in an elevated risk environment. I oversaw the implementation of the National Terrorism Advisory System, and I'd actually like to see it used the way we intended it to be used. Instead of sending out bulletins on things like disinformation and number one threats that are not the number one threats, I have yet to see an NTAS bulletin issued about the crisis on the southwest border and the threat level that it accurately represents. It's not a system to be politicized, and it's obviously being politicized. There should no doubt be a National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin for an elevated threat environment for what's going on at our border currently.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman is back. Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks so much to the witnesses for being here. I want to echo Ranking Member Nadler's comments about the timing of this hearing. It's 3 days after the anniversary of the worst terrorist attack the United States has ever seen. And this week should be a time for all of us in Congress to reflect on the impact of terrorism and what we can do to make our country safer from attacks like the one that we saw on 9/11. But this hearing is not really respecting the legacy of 9/11. Rather, scheduling this hearing for this week, the majority is using the tragedy of September 11th to justify their immigration agenda that does not solve all of the immigration issues that are before us, as my colleague, Congresswoman Escobar, laid out. And it's painful to see the legacy of 9/11 twisted in this political manner. As we've heard from Mr. Nowrasteh, there have been no murders or injuries committed by terrorists who have illegally entered the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border in the past 48 years. This hearing doesn't reflect that reality, nor does it provide a forum for a genuine discussion about how to make our country safer from the terrorists who are most likely to come here. If the other side wanted to do that, they'd work with us to address homegrown terrorists who have committed many of the more violent attacks in the United States, particularly recently. And if they wanted to make our country safer, they'd work with us to provide security to schools, churches, movie theaters, and keep the guns out of the hands of violent individuals with extremist belief. Mr. Nowrasteh, could you remind the subcommittee, how did the 9/11 terrorists enter the United States?
The 19 9/11 hijackers entered lawfully. 18 of them entered on tourist visas. 1 of them entered on a student visa, and they were lawfully present at the time of the attacks.
And is entry through the southern border in any way connected to terrorist activity in the United States?
It has not been historically, and there is very little indication that it is currently.
And what is the likelihood that someone will be murdered by a foreign-born terrorist in the United States?
Based on data from 1975 through the end of 2022, the annual chance of being murdered is about 1 in 4.4 million per year. By comparison, the chance of being murdered in a non-terrorist homicide is about 1 in 20,000 per year, or about 316 times greater.
And if members of this committee want to look at the way to improve national security and terrorist threats, what would you recommend we do?
I think the number one thing to do in this scenario is to increase lawful immigration so that we can control the border. I think the other witnesses up here actually made a fantastic case for doing that when talking about the smuggling and the human rights violations and how the cartel has got their fingers dug in deep to this black market. If you don't like that, the one surefire way to get rid of it, to exclude the black market from this, is to legalize that flow so folks can come illegally. If people can buy a plane ticket from their home country and come here lawfully after being vetted, they're not going to pay cartels $10,000 or smuggle them across a jungle and then a desert where they're going to have a good chance of being raped or murdered, etc. The way to control and to regulate this market is through legalization. We just cannot regulate. It is impossible to regulate a black market. We need to legalize it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Hunt for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When 9/11 happened, I was a sophomore at West Point. I was sitting in my barracks, Eisenhower barracks as I recall, on the 3rd floor, and I watched with terror 3,000 souls leave this earth. At that moment, as a sophomore at West Point, I knew, and my classmates knew, West Point class of 2004, actually 3 of us are currently serving in the halls of Congress right now, we knew that we were all going to go to war. We knew that there was a chance that we would not make it back alive, but by God, we were going to do whatever it took to protect our country and to prevent something like that from ever happening again. And this is why protecting this country and protecting our southern border means so much to me. The open borders that we're seeing right now at our southern borders is a slap in the face to everyone who has sacrificed to keep anything like 9/11 from happening again in our great country. We lost a lot of blood, a lot of treasure to keep our nation safe, including many of my West Point classmates that are no longer with us. We were told that if we fought terror abroad, we could keep it from coming in our own country. And I still believe that to this day. It's because of Joe Biden, and we have now essentially turned our southern border into a welcome mat for terrorists. Now, the Biden administration would like you to believe that every person coming across our border is an asylum seeker simply looking for a better life. That's not only a lie, it's insulting to our intelligence. This administration says that illegal aliens are women and children wanting a better opportunity, and I have some numbers for you that would point out the contrary. Since October 2022, CBP flagged 75,000 illegal aliens in our country as national security risks. Last year, CBP announced that 98 illegal aliens on a terrorist watch list on our southern border. 98. That is 9 times the number of people encountered on the terrorist watch list than during Trump's entire presidency. But wait, there's more. Just last week, the Office Inspector General released their audit of DHS titled, "DHS does not have assurance that all migrants can be located once released into the United States." Quick recap of what's going on here. We have 75,000 illegal immigrants living amongst us who are a national security risk currently. CBP is encountering illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list at a record rate, and DHS is releasing illegal aliens, their national security risk, to the interior of our country, and you can't even tell us where they are. Why do we have a terrorist watch list? If people on our terrorist watch list can simply walk into our open southern border, then why do we have one at all? How is it possible that the FBI has no problem hunting down January 6 protesters years later, but this administration has lost track of illegal aliens who pose a real threat to our national security? We know this administration could track down anyone, anytime, anywhere. We've seen them do it. Why? It's my opinion that this administration views patriots, or as the Biden administration calls them, MAGA Republicans, as national security threats while viewing illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list as asylum seekers simply looking for a better life. We live in an upside-down world today where Americans are vetted and surveilled more than illegal aliens that we know have the propensity to break the law. It's not an oversight. It's not a mistake. This is a choice. We have billionaires right now that are putting patrons in space for sport. And you mean to tell me that we cannot stop illegal immigrants that clearly pose a threat to our national security from entering our country? And I have a report that says it. Now, many of my colleagues on the left, they want to say that, well, if you have border security, that's racist or that's wrong or you're xenophobic. I'm not. I'm pro-America. I am pro-preserving the values of our country and having a sovereign border. 6.5 million people entering our country illegally is ridiculous. Enough fentanyl has poured into this country to kill every American 6 times. It's ridiculous. And I'm somebody that's willing to die for this country and to keep it safe. We cannot continue this. It is time for us to fix our southern border. Thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now, recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Scott, you served as chief of the Border Patrol through the end of the Trump administration and the beginning of the Biden administration. Ms. Escobar and others have assured us there really was no difference in policy between those two administrations. Was that your observation?
It's completely misses the mark. And I will go beyond that. I was in the Border Patrol for 29 years, not just during the Trump administration. I was in San Diego when the Clinton administration said, illegal immigration is a threat to this country. We need to do something about it. And we came up with an operation and we started using things called fences, same as a wall, and we started using consequences, and we addressed it.
What impact did the Biden policies have on the security of our southern border?
It reversed the entire, 29 years of my career. It reversed all the progress we made and completely decimated border security.
Would you say that these changes are responsible for the crisis we now see at that border?
100%, because it's catch and release.
Mr. Nadler assures us that, well, don't worry, everybody who comes across is subject to, his words, rigorous vetting procedure. Would you elucidate on that?
Yeah, the information they give the officer, their name, and even their fingerprints are bounced off of a database here in the United States that has minuscule information about foreigners in it. So it's the equivalent of checking them in basically an empty hard drive.
So you once described it as checking it against a blank sheet of paper.
Correct.
Because we don't have that information, and then they're allowed in.
It sounds really good. It's really doing nothing. It's the interviews where the agents, and they look at their tattoos, they look at their face, they figure out, are they telling you the truth? That's where you find things out, and that is not taking place today because of the massive flow.
Because of the massive flow. And yet the Democrats say the solution to this is we need to increase that massive flow. We need to legalize all of this so that everybody coming in has a chance to go through that very process. How thorough would that be?
I like to actually use facts as well. And the fact is every time, and this goes beyond immigration, every time there's been a consequence for a crime, a deterrent and a consequence, that crime has gone down. When we had consequences on the border and we held people until the judge adjudicated their case, the flow stopped because the vast majority of the asylum seekers are fraud. That's the solution. Just enforce the law.
Okay, now the two numbers that I've been focused on are the 2.6 million illegal aliens that the administration has deliberately allowed into this country, despite the federal law says they should be detained. And in addition to that, the 1.7 million known gotaways, people that the Border Patrol observed crossing the border but simply couldn't intercept because they're completely overwhelmed. As I said in my introductory remarks, this is a population larger than the combination of New Mexico and West Virginia put together. If we legalize that, we're going to get more of it, obviously. How thorough can the vetting process be under such circumstances?
There's no bandwidth for that. So it's nice to talk about things. Theory is great, but in reality, there's only a certain number of agents and officers. It takes 2 hours for a CBP officer to process one of these asylum seekers at a port, about an hour and a half for Border Patrol agents. Just do the math. There would be no enforcement. And then back to New York, they can't handle 100,000? How many is too many? Seriously, we can't, this is unsustainable.
Mr. Nuresta, 5,000 terrorists released from Parowan. We know where one of them went. One of them 10 days later went to Abbey Gate and detonated the bomb that killed 13 U.S. service members. Can you tell us where the other 5,000 are?
I'm sorry, can you tell me the name of that individual? I missed the first part of that.
The terrorist who detonated the bomb came from Parowan. Where are the other 5,000 that were released that day?
Which bomb?
The bomb that was detonated at the Kabul airport.
Oh, in Kabul.
Don't play dumb. Come on.
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You mean in Afghanistan? In Afghanistan.
If you want to play dumb, play dumb. I'm done asking you questions.
I'm sorry, is this about the Southwest border?
I'm not playing this game with the
Is this about terrorism on the border?
Mr. Bensman, we talk about legalizing the process. Don't we already have a legal process availed by millions of people to enter this country legally, who obey all of our laws, who do everything our country's asked of them? Isn't that system already in existence? Isn't the problem that we have millions of people now flouting that law?
Yes, and I think after 9/11, a lot was done to enhance the counterterrorism kind of security screening measures for a lot of those, which I believe made it more difficult. They do fail still sometimes, but I believe that with this mass migration crisis, that the balance is shifting where bad guys across the world are well aware that our border now is a vulnerability and they can get through. There was just recently in July a case in Ohio, FBI case that just wrapped up that involved an Iraqi asylum seeker. He is the pleaded guilty now defendant whose plot involved bringing 4 Iraqi terrorists over the border to kill President George Bush, former President George Bush. That was a legitimate counterterrorism case, and what it shows us is that the bad guys are looking at that border right now.
Well, and as I recall, he actually said that he was now bringing his accomplices in through the southern border because it's so much easier than abusing the visa process. My time's expired, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank all of the members who joined us for today's questioning. This will conclude the hearing. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned.